Welcome to another Friday edition of Engagement That Scales with Rachel Hoppy. Hi, Rachel.
Hi, Shannon, TGIF. This week has been 5 Fridays.
It has, all in a row, but now it's really Friday.
It's really Friday. And I have Jeremiah, who I have not caught up with in
a while, a bit.
Like, it doesn't feel like it should be as long as it probably has been, because you've been busy and I've been busy and you've been decorating Airstreams. So, like, before we get started, like, what have you been up to? Because I need to
Thank you. Sure, I've been busy. My family is doing well, and that's been a main area of focus. I've been also focused on my wellness and fitness. And
I know you look fantastic.
Thank you. Thank you. I really love fitness, and anybody wants to talk about that topic, we can do that at another time. And then my family grew, and it didn't make sense at the time I couldn't work in the house. It was just too loud. And so I did some business analysis, and it made sense to get an Airstream in the backyard as my office as a business expense. And the question people always ask is, do you take it out? And the answer is no. It is just here in the backyard as an actual office, 29 steps from the house. So
Ann Handley lives near me, and
right.
She's got her little hut in the back. And I'm like, oh, I crave the little whatever, whether it's an Airstream or a hut or a whatever.
A shed.
A shed.
A studio.
Yeah. I think they're calling it she sheds now.
Yes, I've heard that term. That's a great one. And you're a business owner, that is something you have that you can do. And I can tell you all the finances and how to do that.
Interesting.
Yes.
So interesting.
You give that a think and you come back to me and I'll be happy to advise you.
Oh, excellent. I bet that may be a whole nother conversation. One that's really probably right now irrelevant, because there's so much other more important things going on. Although it's good that you have a quiet space to discuss all of these things, because they're big issues. I'm lucky enough I have an inside office where I can get away from the noise, so I'm not stuck in the same. We don't have Silicon Valley pricing.
That was a factor too. I couldn't rent an office. It would be 6 times the price of getting an Airstream as a full business. It just didn't make sense.
Yeah. So
all of that is documented. Actually, USA Today did a write-up of my work, and so that just went live on Sunday. So do look for that.
You've gotten a whole little stream of attention just for your office space. That's fascinating. I mean, I guess it goes into the it's
future of work, right? Where do we work?
Work stuff.
It's all tied, cost of living. I mean, working in a distributed way, finding creative ways to work. These are all related topics to the world.
Which actually gets me into kind of what I wanted to talk to you about, because you've been talking about a lot of these crises that are like coming up. I've been talking a lot about these crises because people are, we're in a fortunate situation because of the work we do. People are like, oh, online engagement. We need to do that. And you're like, yeah.
Connecting to customers in the community, kind of important.
We still need to talk to and engage people. What are I've been hearing kind of really interesting reflections from leaders on the whole experience, but what have you been hearing, and what are the conversations you've been having around all of these things?
Thank you. So for 2 months, my client base disappeared. They were just so quiet, and everybody went into the holes, and we were all in shock, right? And at that time I was managing all of my kids. My wife works at the hospital, so I couldn't really even focus on business. And I was just like looking and observing and freaking out like everybody else. However, in May and June, the business world reignited, and we're certainly engaging with our customers and clients. And I'm doing many of these conferences, online conferences, paid speaking gigs. So things are coming alive, but in a distributed and remote way. And so it's certainly happening. For some of our clients, we're being asked to model out what will the new world look like in quarantine, post-quarantine, super drug cocktail or vaccine, or post-pandemic plus recession. And I actually put together a graphic, and maybe you could share it in the show notes. And I realize this is kind of a horrible topic, all of it. I could see there's multiple issues compounding in our world. And I labeled this the crisis cake.
Yeah,
I know
I saw
this It's
Yeah.
horrible, but it's catchy and alliteration. So in the crisis cake, there's a number of things, and these are not a great order in prioritization. Everybody's going to have their own order depending on whom you are. It includes things like the climate collapse, pandemic, recession, inequality, racism, civil unrest, political uncertainty, fears of automation, and then infodemic. So that includes things like fake news or too much
Mhm.
information. So, and I was just like, oh my gosh, it's so much. Let me just put it in one graphic so we could try to figure out what does this mean. And we collectively, as a society, as a country, as friends, as family members, as customers, we got to figure this out, and it's a lot to take on. What do you
But
think?
I will say it's been coming for a long time. Like it's not, well, COVID is new. We've had Ebola, we've had the bird flu. Like
SARS, MERS.
it,
Yep.
it just got out of the bag more than some of uh, those other health diseases. And I actually look at the environment going forward and saying, we're not going to get out of this.
Not for a
We're
few
going to
years.
continue to
Right.
have constant crises, whether those are health or
That's right.
environmental or political or what have you. I don't
Hmm.
think, I think, and it may not include working remotely for like social isolation for 3 months, but as business leaders, we're going to have to get into this is the status quo, not the exception, I think.
That's right. And you're absolutely right. And I'm glad we have somebody like you to advise leaders on this. And this means that even our communities where we are, whether they're for business or for personal, we're all going to be struggling, and people are going to have mental issues and seeking to connect with people. We
Mhm.
know from the studies that the people who live the longest have purpose, and they're part of a community of people around them. And that could be online, or that could be in person, or hybrid of both. So that is the important thing, is that
Purpose doesn't live just online
no, it
or
doesn't.
offline.
But either way, yeah, they're all connected. Next door is a manifestation of your physical community around you, now echo chambering online, for better or for worse.
Well,
So
and we've actually seen that in our work for years now, because more of our work is around digital transformation instead of just one community. And it's no longer exclusively online, meaning online is just, well, online is a mix of channels, but offline is just another channel, right? So it's
and
how
they
do you manage the community
that's right.
umbrella, and what channels do you use for different programming and different behaviors.
I
So
completely agree.
we've kind of flipped too, and it is a little odd because we started out
Mm.
really kind of looking at the online, and I keep telling people that like one of the benefits of looking at online communities is offline. If you have a purely offline community, you can't see it all because it's so complicated in terms of like who's talking to who, where they're talking to. They're also using multiple channels. They're using the church and people's living rooms and the store down the street, and you can't actually see the whole thing. And online you can't either, but you can see more of it. And so you can see the dynamics in a way that you never could offline, but the dynamics are kind of similar, just sped up online. So I feel like we've learned a lot about communities, period.
In addition to that, we're seeing many new community tools emerge too, right? We're seeing people adopt tools like TikTok to dance remotely because we can't dance in person. Yesterday, Snapchat announced many different new filters and features in an app ecosystem to help people connect when they're
Yeah.
apart. There is a new audio-based social network called Clubhouse that I'm very addicted
Mm.
to, that is growing because people have Zoom fatigue now, so they just want to
Yeah.
hear each other. So
Yeah.
this is going to manifest, to your point, in new tools to connect in
Do you
in a
know what
very different way.
actually blew my mind? Your kids are a little younger than mine, I think.
They're young.
But my daughter's in 4th grade, and she moved to remote learning, which if they're younger, it's really tough because they don't even read yet. But
Hmm.
her teacher was posting um, her morning meeting as a video online. So all the kids would watch it when they got up or whenever they started their school day. And they would all respond with audio comment to say hello to each other. And I don't know why, but it blew my mind because I've always seen the text replies to everything. And it was this asynchronous method of feeling more synchronous, right? Like it was somewhere in between those two things in a really compelling way because it brought in more emotion and more connection.
That's right. And one of the things we're seeing, like with the rise of Alexa and Google Home and Siri, is that'll be a persistent feature where the trend that I'm seeing is that we might have audio on frequently, if not most of the time during our waking hours. People have earbuds in. And so we'll be connected as we go around the world, but we might hear things, or it'll selectively tell you somebody's talking to you, and you might get pulled into like a party chat room. So those are all this thing. It's a new way of community. It won't be a bulletin board software like we did, 10, 15 years ago, but the community might be just connected through sound in a very different way that I can't really describe. And, or people might be sharing their biometrics. Like we already see this now. People are holding each other accountable. Did you work out? How many steps did you do? What is your mood like? Are you breathing right? So that data in a community may not even be explicitly shared.
Yeah, so, I mean, we have the Pelletin.
You have that?
Oddly, for a community person, I don't want to connect with anyone on that.
That's one of their biggest selling features that for addiction is the community aspect.
Yeah,
of it.
but
why don't you just buy a standalone bike?
Well, my husband really likes the community piece.
Okay, and you don't. The irony.
I like it's for that thing, right? Like I don't like working out with people. And maybe I'm introverted. I don't know what it is. I just I don't.
You're not unique. I know other people who are the same way. So that's fine.
And what I do like is that I can compare my stats to other people.
That's social.
It is, but I don't want to be in a class with them. I don't want to be like real time competing with them, right? Like I want to compete against myself and benchmark myself, but I don't find that like one-on-one or visceral competition helpful to motivate me.
So I studied Pelletin and I interviewed over a dozen users. This was actually a recent post that I did on my blog, and I'll share the link with you in the chat room. But essentially, and I talked to, this has been my coverage area lately, is tech wellness and tech well-being, because my personal interest is as well, and I have clients paying us to know this topic. And they're actually using 5 chemicals that are naturally occurring from our bodies and our minds in order to addict you, Rachel. Would you like to hear about them?
Sure. I mean, I know some of the science behind this and it doesn't work on me. And maybe I'm just like difficult. I don't know.
Well, you've already articulated one of them you're attracted to. So here they are. There's 5. And it's an acronym called ADOSE, ADOSE. Adrenaline, dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphin. So adrenaline, that's obvious. And dopamine is from the high fives, and then the stats on the leaderboard. So Rachel, I mean, inside deep, when you know that you're kicking ass on the leaderboard, even if it's not real time, you feel good, right?
No, and I know that about myself. And actually, I just found out I'm ADD, so I don't have enough serotonin in my brain.
But that self-awareness is critical. So that's really
but
good.
Like it's interesting to understand, it's just interesting to understand that I don't have that dopamine serotonin fix, and why I can't.
How did you figure that out? Like, how do you determine that?
Because I was getting overwhelmed, like by work, and I was legitimately busy, but there was something like I was just shutting down. And I was on sabbatical.
I saw that.
I was burnt out, and I was like, I gotta step away for a little bit. And as part of that, actually, going back, I was reading about my daughter because she's one of these twice exceptional kids. She has a really high IQ, and then she's got some processing challenges. And part of that, I was reading about ADHD in women. And I was like, that's interesting.
So did you take a test to determine this?
Yeah, and actually,
Oh, wow.
you'll
I'm sorry, I don't
appreciate.
mean to get too
No,
personal,
no,
okay?
that's
But
fine.
it's
I wrote a
fascinating.
blog post about it, so I've shared it because I don't actually consider it a disability. It's why my mind works really well as an analyst, actually, because it's the way I process things. Um, but I took a test, and you'll appreciate this as an analyst. My psychiatrist was like, "You're 3 standard deviations away from normal," and I was like,
Wow, that's
"Hmm,
significant.
that is
But I don't know the scale, but I assume
that's
that
yeah."
sounds
Well, I
like a
mean,
lot.
from average, right? Like
Right.
you're 3, and I was like, "That is challenging to like. I've never wanted anything. I maxed out on that," and it was really interesting because like I grew up with the attention deficit things are physical, right? Like you think of the physically hyperactive kids, and I was never physically hyperactive, but my brain is like constantly churning. And so once I was reading about women and inattentive ADHD, I was like, oh yeah, there's something very familiar about that.
Well, I think you're wonderful and you're a gift to the industry. So don't change. We love you how you are.
Yeah.
Okay.
So like, and that's how I mean, I don't know about the rest, but like that sensing or understanding yourself is how you get empowered by it, right?
That's
So
right. So knowing yourself,
yeah,
and I think that's also part of this tech movement. And there's a downside to this, like all this information we're getting about ourselves, the tech companies know too, and that is good and horrible at the same time. So we do need to have some balance with tech in our minds and bodies, and we look at that as a core issue in the space.
well, it's interesting too because I used to use a Fitbit. I have an Apple Watch. I don't use them, and so I don't really. And part of it is a privacy thing. Part of it is I look at that as too much feedback. And it's kind of like business metrics, right? If you're getting
Yes.
too much feedback, you prioritize the wrong
And you measure on the wrong thing, like
thing.
measuring community engagement only without understanding what are they achieving the goals,
Right.
like you know.
Or like I have this big thing, we measure content and transactions. And so now we're swimming in content, but we can't differentiate the content. It's an avalanche of
And we
content.
have an extreme amount of content right now, and that's creating many issues as well.
Yeah, so I'm very cautious about how much I analyze myself and when, just because of that issue. But I also don't like wearing things. So when you're talking to all of these leaders, I like bringing up the data thing it always strikes me as the ethics conversation. Where are
Yes.
and the bias in metrics, right? Because the adoption curve typically is skewed in terms of like whose data comes in first based on who's adopting whatever the thing is.
Right, and there's some complexity here too. We also know that many of these tools are made by one specific persona type, who, by the way, doesn't look like me,
Mm-hmm.
nor you.
Mm-hmm.
And so yesterday there was news reported that both, well, Amazon, IBM, and Microsoft pulled back their facial recognition software from the police industry, and they're no longer selling it. IBM says no more ever. Amazon says we're going to take a 1-year moratorium, and they've encouraged Congress to develop regulations. They're worried how the police forces are going to use it, considering recent behavior. Secondly, many of these facial recognition systems don't recognize people with darker complexions.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of a big freaking problem. I mean, we've already heard this trope like this darker looking person matches the description of a potential suspect, right? But now with facial recognition, the promise is you would actually know who this is. But this could all be flipped over on the other side. This technology could be used to find potential assailants that could be attacking women or attacking minorities, right? So this could be used in different ways. But the world isn't quite ready, right? Because the technology hasn't been built right. So to
Well,
answer your question, that's the tech industries. And
it's
so the traditional companies are
building
watching
and it's
them.
the regulation of when are we okay using this and when are we not okay using this.
And I'd say with the movement of Black Lives Matter and evaluating the whole system, all of society, including tech, like, and companies need to think about this too, is to really think, are we deploying this in the right way, or are we going to end up hurting the customers, ourselves, and employees in the long run?
You kind of have a pulse on Silicon Valley. Are people in Silicon Valley,
Crazy? Yes.
well, no, I know they're crazy. Uh, are they reflecting on the culture of leadership in Silicon Valley at all?
So that's a very difficult question because there are 7 million people here. So there's different people and
Right.
different things. Like, there's a real dichotomy. There's, a few towns south of me, there are the billionaires, right? The older white male billionaires. They live in Atherton and Palo Alto. But in San Francisco, you're going to find key leaders of Black Lives Matter. In Berkeley, you're going to find, community-based sharing economy hippies,
Yes,
right?
but the
So
tech industry is overwhelmingly led by white men. So
this
have
is
they
true.
been reassessing? So the area is quite diverse,
Yes.
but technology is not.
Okay, so that's a more specific question. So yes, they're making motions of being reflective, whether or not they're doing thoughts and prayers or making systemic changes to diversify the workforce, the executive board, and to build ethical products remains to be seen. So the knee-jerk reaction from the tech companies are they've had town halls. It was a disaster at LinkedIn, a disaster. And Mark Zuckerberg did this at Facebook a few years ago, and some employees scratched out Black Lives Matter and put All Lives Matter, which created a huge discussion and more. And then the tech companies themselves are gentrifying neighborhoods. In particular, Facebook is pushing out people from East Palo Alto and Menlo Park, and raising the incomes of the workers who are then taking over the neighborhoods, which creates the plight of those initial residents. So I'm giving a lot of information here. It is complicated, but I would say in terms of cultural change, awareness is high. Discussions now are high. By the way, a month ago, I didn't notice whether I should say African American or Black. It's very clear. It's Black Americans. It's Black people. I understand that now. So I am learning on this journey as well. I cannot virtue signal. I have made a lot of mistakes. I'm still learning. So I think yes. So I think that's where we are, is we're having an open conversation. I don't know if we're going to move to action though. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, it's just interesting because I worked out there for years, and I actually, one of the biggest companies out there, I had all the interviews, I had a verbal job offer, and the offer went up to the senior vice president, and the hiring manager was told I didn't go to good enough school. I went to one of the Seven Sisters women's colleges.
Wait, that seems really odd because schooling is not as important in Silicon Valley.
It's sexist, right? Right?
Yes.
Like,
I agree with you on that.
Right? Like it wasn't, you're right. It wasn't about schooling. It shouldn't have been about schooling. I had
So that was a cop-out. That was a cop-out answer.
It was a cop-out answer. So that was 15 years ago. It was a while ago. But like what I've observed in tech, and it's part of the reason I got out of tech, is, I was at a startup in Silicon Valley. I was on the management team. I did go to board meetings. I was the only woman ever in any of those meetings. And when I think about Blacks, I saw a thread this morning, a Black woman in marketing. She's like, I've never had another Black person in my chain of seniority. I've only worked with another Black marketer once in my life. And so when you're the token or only, and you probably know this by being of Asian descent, is like, and I was actually pondering on Twitter this morning. I'm like, is imposter syndrome just racism and sexism? Meaning we're made to feel different. And so when you feel different, you're in a very vulnerable place to try and empower yourself. And then you're blamed for having imposter syndrome. And you're like, oh, is it you? Or is it everybody around you? And so
all real issues.
Like in the tech industry, there's so much I love about technology, but I just found there wasn't really space for me.
Well, first of all, I wanted to thank you for sharing that story and, and being vulnerable so we can learn from that. So thank you, Rachel.
Oh, well, it's a long time ago, but like I think about it a lot because that's essentially people of color too, right? Like,
so I'm glad you were able to bring that together and reflect that too.
It's not just me.
Right.
And so like these, and what I mean by sharing it is you can't just make a little effort. You've got to bring in whole cohorts of people.
It's got to be across the whole system.
And yes, and different levels of people. And kind of like innovation in products that you've been working on for years, you almost have to have a innovation pilot, right? Of bringing in this whole other culture. And then how do you kind of integrate that? What I observed, and actually it was interesting because I was reflecting on this as well, is the board meetings that I used to go to, I used to just internally
monoculture,
roll.
right?
Huh?
Yes. Monoculture.
Well, no, it wasn't that. I would roll my eyes because they wouldn't actually address the hard conversations. So what I observed is there were the young other executives at my company who were kind of like what I call peacocking for the venture capitalists who were on our board. And there was the venture capitalists, older white men, kind of projecting their power and trying to kind of peacock in front of the younger men who knew the technology. And I'd sit there and I'd be like, none of this matters. Like, what are we doing here? We're not actually discussing the issues.
We're peacocking.
We're peacocking. Like, we're all peacocking in front of each other. And so I'd just be like, oh my God, right? And we'd leave the meeting and nothing would really be discussed. And I was thinking about that. I never talked in those meetings, and I've never been shy about sharing my opinions because I didn't feel like that insight that I was having, that I was rolling my eyes about, was related really. And then I was like, you know what? In hindsight, it was absolutely related because it had to do with the effectiveness of the board. We never actually solved any problems, right? And so I look at women and people of color and you and people who have had to negotiate difficult conversations their whole lives. And I'm like, we shouldn't bring them in to our cultures because we're doing them a favor. We need to bring them into our cultures so that we can actually have the come to Jesus discussions.
That's right. And I think that's been one of the tropes here, that the racism isn't a Black problem. It's a white problem. And so I'm learning that. And also too, I'm neither white or Black. So I'm trying to figure out what role do I play? How do I help both sides? How do I help my people, my group? How do we lift? And I'm community minded, we're both community professionals. So we're all asking these questions. We're all putting the mirror up. And
I think that's encouraging to me, right? That everybody's thinking about it.
I don't know anybody who's not talking about it. Some people who are very conservative that I know politically and socially are having introspection on this too, that I didn't expect them to do that. So everybody is discussing it.
I was just talking to somebody, and this goes back to your crisis cake, which is, have these layers of crises actually made people more empathetic? And so now they're more open to having these conversations or reflecting on some of this because they've now had a very uncomfortable experience about something.
Yeah, and I think technology has played a role in that. So we saw a horrible thing happen for 9 minutes online with George Floyd, and we all saw that, and that triggered. I mean, we it's like we were there, right? It was like it was recorded. We saw the whole clip. That hit us, right? Everybody. I mean, that was visceral in the most vicious, violent possible way, and we were already sitting at home, sad, depressed, confused, and isolated, wanting to connect with people physically, right? That is part of our core nature as humans, is to connect with people.
Yeah.
And so all those perfect storms, and the weather's getting better in summer, like all that came together into this perfect mixture. So yes, I think the empathy is higher, but also online, we see the opposite of empathy, which is aggression too, right? Or ignorance too. We're seeing that come out in spades. Some of that which is automated too, right? So,
although I feel like you can really design your own social environment online if you know how to. So the example there is
that's good and bad, right?
It is good and bad, but if you're intentional, what I've done is create this huge list and started following, and started this a couple of years ago, but I have this whole list of just Black voices. And I don't engage with them that much, but it's fascinating to watch the reaction to news. Like I learn something, right? Because it's almost like I get to be a fly on a wall of a conversation that I've never had access to, because no one would say that to me directly, some of those things that they're talking to each other about. And so if you use technology that way, it's really eye-opening.
Yes. So I'm one of the early users of Clubhouse, which is a audio-based social network, and there's many Black people involved, and they're saying things in this private discussion, and I can hear it. We're talking directly that I would never, ever, ever hear. And when you hear that, oh, that really empathy is happening. Like, and I tell other people, do you know what I heard? How bad it is? And I would reflect that to others. So yeah, technology can help with empathy. I think that's a great point that you brought up.
Yeah. Well, let's wrap up because I guess we're at the end of the half hour. Is there one particular thing, kind of like I end on one last thing? What's on your mind? Like what have you seen in the last week or two that like has you just kind of thinking?
That's a big topic. I'm trying to figure out how I can help marginalized communities. What is my role? And there are some things I'm going to do. I don't want to virtue signal at this moment and say, you know, how I'm going to pronounce those. I'm not ready to say that in this public forum, but I am making commitments and building plans and asking how I can help. And I am moving to action. And I understand I have a position of influence amongst business leaders, and I will use that position to help those that are marginalized. And I think that it's not to hit anybody over the head, it's to help them too, because this grows the whole economy. This helps them grow their market, and they want to do that. I see them, they want to do that. So I want to help, and I will help.
That's awesome. And one thing we've been doing similarly, felt like I didn't want to make any commitments. We have our own community of community managers. We're having a lot of discussions in that community of what is our role.
Huge role. Huge role.
Because we recognize there's a voice that people listen to us. And actually I've been really heartened by how people are sharing there, because, and a lot of it is white voices, but white people sharing kind of like their confusion, which is their invitation to kind of help them kind of work through those issues where we never had that invitation before. So like, I think some people say those conversations in that language and that is not enough, but it's absolutely the place you have to start. So I think to that extent, your intent is as important as anything else.
Thank you. But I need to move to action, which I am
absolutely
slowly.
It's not something that you should take lightly either. So like,
Right.
right, it's,
And I want to make sure I'm doing the right thing
yeah.
for the right reason for the right person too.
And finding out what's needed versus just doing something to show you're doing something.
And so that is something I think about a lot, and I want to show some humility in that as well.
Well,
Thank you,
you've
Rachel.
always been very humble, Jeremiah, so that I'm not worried about. And the community orientation, I think, helps too, because you invite people to share how they're thinking about things. And that's absolutely where you start with all of these difficult conversations.
We're connected in all of this. Thank you,
Well,
Rachel, for
thank
having
you
me.
for spending a half hour with me. Good
My
luck
pleasure.
with
Thank
all
you.
of those conversations, and have a wonderful Friday. It looks like it's sunny and delightful like
It's
it.
wonderful here in California, and I wish you all a great weekend as well. Thank you.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.